When the judge slammed his gavel at the Joker, everyone expected chaos, a laugh, a threat, maybe even blood. But what happened next made the entire court rise to their feet in disbelief, because for the first time in his life, the Joker wasn't there to cause trouble. He was there to expose it. His smile wasn't painted for madness, it was carved from betrayal. And as he slowly stood, wrists chained, eyes burning with a truth no one wanted to hear, you could feel it. Something in that courtroom was about to break. Not laws, not bones, but the lies that built the city. What the judge didn't know was that slamming that gavel had just triggered the Joker's final, most dangerous trick. A trick not meant to destroy Gotham, but to reveal it. Before we begin this dark journey of justice and madness, hit the subscribe button so you never miss the twisted truths hidden behind stories like this. He moved like a wound that would not heal. Slow, deliberate, a grin that had been carved into bone. The chains at his wrists clinked once as he stood, and the sound dropped like a stone into the court's thunderous silence. Cameras hungrily framed him. Whispers crept through the rows. The judge's gavel lay heavy and useless on the bench. Everyone expected a spectacle. What they did not expect was the quiet. "This city taught me the rules," Joker said, his voice calm enough to belong to a man talking in a cafe, not confessing in front of 100 eyes. "It taught me that rules are for those who can't pay for exceptions." He paused, and from somewhere under his sleeve, he drew a slim rectangle, not flashy, not theatrical, just a small piece of metal and plastic that fit in the palm like a secret. The prosecutor's eyes narrowed. The bailiff tightened his grip. A woman 2 rows back covered her mouth. He did not shout. He did not laugh. He set the device on the counsel table as if placing a flower. "Listen," he said. "This is the sound of a city trading its soul for comfort." What came through the courtroom speakers was not the Joker's manic cackle. It was the judge's voice, older, measured, talking in a tone of quiet cruelty that made the gallery lean forward. He spoke of evidence that would be made to disappear, of favors called in, of sentences negotiable for the right price. He named names without naming them, a shorthand the corrupt used, a litany of transactions disguised as jurisprudence. The sound of his laughter later in the recording was what made the room tilt. Faces went pale. A juror's hand flew to her throat. The mayor in the front row went rigid. The judge, who had moments before pounded order into the room, suddenly looked smaller, as if the floor had dropped from under him. His hand hovered over the gavel, as if unsure whether to strike it or drop it. He was the one on trial, and the court had not seen it coming. "You promised justice," the Joker murmured, and for the first time the word promised sounded like a currency he could spend. He told the story in fragments, the names the judge had struck from files, the young men who never returned home, the jury boxes filled with quiet nods, and the empty pockets stuffed with silence. He narrated not to gloat, but to make the court feel the cost. "They called me monster," he said, "but monsters are easier to sell than the truth." A camera cut to a woman with dark eyes who had been in the gallery the night his world fell apart. She stood then, the old scar on her knuckle catching the light. "My boy," she said, voice raw. "You said you'd find him." The camera could not hide the tears. The judge's jaw tightened. Outside, somewhere beyond the courthouse, a hum built, the electric buzz of phones waking. People leaned to their screens. Text surged like a tide. The device on the table had done more than play a recording in a room full of witnesses. It had opened a door. Messages, documents, corroborating accounts, everything the city had buried, began to unfold like quicksilver, shattering careful facades. The prosecutor rose, fury bruising his face. "This is evidence tampered with," he barked. "You can't just—" He stopped, because the courtroom had already stopped listening to his rules. The air smelled of ozone and something older, the metallic scent of a truth that had been kept in the dark too long. "You think this is chaos?" Joker asked, and his eyes were small and certain. "Chaos is what happens when nobody speaks. What I offer is order. The order of consequences." He stepped toward the bench, and the judge flinched, as if proximity could make the stain of his decisions more visible. A twist unspooled like a bitter joke. The recording did not end with corruption alone. At its last seconds, a second voice, immediately recognizable to anyone in that room, cut through. It was the mayor admitting to a meeting in a warehouse where decisions had been brokered. The mayor's face, until then an expression of studied composure, collapsed into human panic. He mouthed a single syllable and then rose, hands shaking. "This is a lie," he croaked, but his words were drowned by the flood now escaping from every corner of the courthouse. Someone in the back yelled, "To the microphones! To the press!" Cameras swarmed, phones streamed live. In minutes, what had been contained by oak and marble would be in every hand, in every home. Then the final, cruelest twist. As the court rose in a stunned, chaotic murmur, the judge, the man whose hammer had once sealed the fate of so many, reached for his briefcase. He opened it slowly, as if searching for the courage to do something honest. Inside, instead of papers, there was a photograph, dog-eared and folded. A younger judge, laughing with a boy who had the same crooked smile carved into him. Now, the recognition in the Joker's eyes was not triumph. It was something that shivered with grief. "Do you remember him?" Joker asked softly. The judge's knuckles whitened. "The boy you sent away to save your seat? The family you turned away?" For a heartbeat, the courtroom forgot to breathe. Then a sound, not applause, not jeers, but a collective intake, rolled through the room like a storm front. The judge stood there, portable proof of his own complicity in his hand, while the city outside began to wake to the evidence of its bargain. "You wanted me to be the villain," Joker said, and there was a tenderness in the admission that hurt. "So I played your part too." Before anyone could move, a shrill alarm began to wail. Not the courts, but the city's emergency siren, startling and precise. Screens in the room flashed with a map. Other courthouses, other offices, other judges. The camera panned to the hallway where guards were already running. Someone shouted the word "copy" like a spell. The device on the table blinked as though pleased. And then, as the judge's face went pale and the crowd surged, a single voice from the press pool said what everyone had been thinking but was afraid to say aloud. "He's not just exposing them, he's starting something." Joker smiled, not cruel now, but weary. "I wasn't asking to be forgiven," he said. "I was asking to be listened to." The doors of the courtroom burst open as men in plain clothes rushed in. A gavel fell from the judge's hand and struck the floor, scattering sand-dollar sparks of sound. For a moment, everything suspended. The judge, the Joker, the city, balanced on the moment before the next act. Outside, more sirens. Inside, a phone screen lit up with a name that made the Joker's grin falter for the first time. Batman. For a second, the courtroom held its breath the way water holds breath before a plunge. Men in plain clothes pivoted toward the doorway. Cameras swung like hawks. The phone on the table pulsed with the name, and the Joker's smile folded inward, not from fear, but from something like reverence. He didn't flinch when the dark silhouette filled the doorway, tall, exacting, an absence that had always carried more judgment than any gavel. "You came," Joker said, and it sounded almost like a greeting between old conspirators. Batman stepped forward without the theatrics the city expected. No cape-fluttering entrance, just the slow, deliberate approach of a man who carried consequences. "This ends," he said. His voice was iron-wrapped in fatigue. "Turn yourself in. Let them take you." The courtroom watched the exchange as if it were a duel played in two voices. The judge, caught between his crumpled briefcase and his own deceit, kept his eyes lowered. The mayor was scrambling for damage control, but his practiced facade cracked each time the recording's echo replayed in the jurors' minds. Joker looked at Batman the way a man looks at a mirror that finally tells the truth. "You always say that," he replied, gentle, almost mocking. "Ends. Everything must end for you." He tipped his head to the judge and then to the live feeds, now proliferating through phones and televisions. But an end for some is a beginning for others. There was history between them that not even the city could forget. An austerity of morals that had bent both men until they nearly broke, then mended into different shapes. Batman's presence was a demand for containment. Joker's presence was an insistence on consequence. Neither really asked to be understood, but both craved it. "Why this way?" Batman asked. "Why not fight them inside the law?" Joker's laugh was a low, sorrowful thing. "Because the law is often a costume," he said, "and costumes hide rot." He spread his hands as if offering the entire courtroom the answer instead of just the judge. "You taught them fear of me. I taught them fear of losing their masks. Which one changes more?" Then, as if peeling a layer off the night, Joker told a piece of the truth that made the judge flinch like a struck animal. Years ago, a file had disappeared, an evidence folder that would have freed a child or at least spared a family the word disappearance. That file had been stamped confidential and locked away under the bench of a man who chose his career over a boy. The boy had been sent away, institutionalized, cataloged as collateral. The photograph in the judge's briefcase was not just a memory. It was a promise he had once made and then bought his silence with.
"You made me who I am," Joker said softly. "You made me necessary. You gave me a debt and called it order."
Batman did not argue. He had seen what a system inured to its own violence could become. He had stood on rooftops and watched men like the judge decide which lives were expendable. What he couldn't accept was the method: pain as pedagogy, chaos as curriculum. "Collateral," the judge whispered. A small word, but under the weight of it, the courtroom sagged. The mayor's mouth formed an apology that died there. Public eyes were no longer on the gavel, but on the ledger of compromises. Then, as officers moved to close in, the Joker did something he had planned with the calm of a man who had rehearsed betrayal like a prayer. He tapped the device at his side, not a prop, but a key to a network of truths he'd set loose across the city's arteries hours before. Men and women in diners, subways, hospitals, and high-rises began to receive calls and videos streamed across screens. Evidence that had been siloed, corrupted, hidden under stamps and bribes spilled like rain over the city's conscience. Names, dates, correspondences, the judge's soft, amiable voice in private recordings, the mayor's casual admission of meetings held in basements where fate was negotiated. This was the plan: not to destroy single people, but to break the cozy architecture that allowed damage to be anonymized. And it worked. There was no longer a single courtroom to contain the fury. The city became the court. "You're making martyrs of them," Batman said, but the words came out flattened by the realization that truth could no longer be silenced. Joker's smile tightened into something like pity. "I'm not making martyrs," he said. "I'm offering witnesses." He turned his head as if listening to a distant chorus and then looked back to the judge. "You will answer. They will answer, and the city will decide whether to forgive or to rebuild." Just as the officer's hands closed on the Joker's wrists again, a sound cut through. A single sharp report like a cork popped somewhere in the chaos. The judge's briefcase, opened in those frantic moments, revealed not more papers, but a small, folded note, the color of old promises. The judge's hand trembled as he read a single line written in a hand he thought he'd forgotten. "I remember you."
He looked at the Joker with a horror that was personal, immediate. "You lied to me," he said. "That I was—"
The Joker only smiled, and for the first time there was no triumph in it. "You taught me to trade smiles," he said. "You kept the currency." Then, as the officers tugged him away, his voice slid low and certain. "This isn't my victory, it's your reckoning." Outside the courthouse windows, the city had begun to roar. Not with applause, not with hatred, but with a kind of uneasy awakening. Sirens mixed with distant shouts. Phones lit whole faces in apartments. The scales of accountability were tipping. Batman hesitated, torn between the law he embodied and the moral collapse he was witnessing. He wanted to stop the Joker, and also understood that stopping him here might be to stop the consequences from reaching the guilty. He placed a hand on the Joker's shoulder, not a grip of arrest, but an anchor of recognition.
"One day you'll face what you did," Batman said.
"So will you," Joker answered. "And one day they'll have to choose which of us they want their city to remember." As they let him out, the Joker's eyes found the judge's and locked. Not in madness, but in a dead, unloving sympathy. For a breathless second, the man who had once pounded the gavel like the city's heartbeat knelt awkwardly, not in repentance, but in the collapse of pretense. Then a sound from a reporter's phone sliced the moment. A live feed of families, faces that had been erased for years, walking into the courthouse, carrying records and whispers and the hard, small things that counted as proof. They stood in the doorway like witnesses bringing justice home. The final twist came not as a boom, but as a whisper that moved through the crowd like a new law. The boy in the photograph was not simply a victim or a memory. He was somewhere in the city now, alive, because someone had chosen to hide him, and alive because someone else had chosen to fight for him. The Joker's revenge, brutal though it was, had cracked a lid long sealed, and from the crack spilled the possibility that a broken city might one day be rebuilt. The officers tightened their grip. Batman's shadow consumed the doorway. The Joker tilted his head toward the cameras and said, "Tell them to watch. Tell them to remember."
They did.
If you felt the chill of that courtroom and want more dark cinematic stories that blur the line between monster and martyr, hit subscribe. Now join us. Because in the city of stories, some truths are louder than gavel strikes.